Article 2. Epigraph. The Congress shall have the power to establish an uniform rule of naturalization. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. He who wants to persuade should put his trust not in the right argument, but in the right word. Joseph Conrad. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Article 2, Section 1. Dorm room, Harwood College. 3 years before Election Day. "I'm looking for Shanice Andrews," said the man on the phone. His voice was low-pitched and confident. It sounded vaguely familiar. "Speaking." "Glad I got you. This is Indiana State Attorney General George Garrett. I saw your video investigating the Margaret Sanger Center." "You did?" "Yes. We were very impressed. We've begun an investigation of them too," Garrett said. "Glad to hear that." "You just showed that all it takes is a camera and some guts to get through their wall of immunity." "Immunity?" "It isn't real immunity. It's just that nobody's got the guts to go after these guys. I've been going through the records of the Sanger Center's health and safety inspections. Every time there's a violation, their lawyers argue that the inspection was a pretext for infringing on a woman's right to choose. The Sanger Center is effectively unmonitored by the government. And you saw the press's reaction to your videos." "The press didn't cover them." "Exactly. Neither the government nor the press holds these guys to account for anything. Somehow I'm having trouble seeing my way to the conclusion that you uncovered the only crimes the center is committing." "I could see that too." "I'm going to announce the start of this investigation to the press tomorrow. We're going to subpoena records." "Wow, good luck." "I'd like to invite you to the State House. I want to discuss something with you." "What do you mean?" "I'd like to offer you a job." "I'm going to have to talk to Jonathan. We made the videos together. We plan to make more." "That's up to you. Why don't you watch my press conference? I'm about to announce my investigation of the Sanger Center, then make your decision." "Okay, what do you expect?" "I'm a black Republican. Any tiny misstep I make is a big story. The Sanger Center is the darling of the left. If they commit serious crimes, my reaction to their crimes is the story." "Just like Clarence Thomas." The name George Garrett wasn't very familiar to Shanice. After hanging up, she looked him up online. He grew up in a poor, single-parent South Bend household. For much of his first 14 years, Garrett was without much parental supervision. His mother worked constantly to put a roof over the heads of her 3 boys. Left to his own devices, Garrett slacked off in his studies and failed 4 classes his freshman year in high school. His future looked bleak until his mother got a promotion, enabling her to quit one of her 2 jobs and spend more time with her family. Under his mother's watchful eye, Garrett got his grades back on track, graduating first in his class in high school and then in college. He made it to law school on a full academic scholarship and edited the Law Review. After law school, Garrett's rise was rapid, first as a small-time prosecutor, then as the state attorney for Indianapolis, and then to the Attorney General of Indiana. The next day, Shanice sat down with Hall to watch the press conference. "This is going to be a feeding frenzy," Hall said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I hope he survives." "Why wouldn't he survive?" "Because Republicans always melt under questioning. They want to be liked by the press. Most of them are losers like the jabronis in your pro-life club." "We'll see," Shanice replied. The press conference opened with Garrett standing at a podium in front of several dozen reporters. He began by announcing his plans to open the records of the 216 abortions performed in Indiana on girls under 15 in the last 12 months. He was going to investigate why only 6 of the cases were reported to law enforcement for suspicion of child sexual abuse. He would also investigate any doctor who failed to report the cases as required by law. He then solicited the reporters' questions. The first questioner was a white woman. Shaking her index finger at Garrett, she asked, "Why, Mr. Garrett, is your myopic agenda to take down a federally funded women's health organization?" Ignoring her anger, Garrett's answer was calm. Indiana citizens have to work to earn money for the things they need and want. Some of that money is confiscated by the government and given to the Sanger Center. I believe it's fair for citizens to know who is receiving the money that is taken from them and how it's being used, especially if it's being used to cover up serious crimes. A thin young man who somehow managed to look effeminate, even with his neatly coiffed beard, took his turn. Your critics say that the real reason you are trying to take down the Sanger Center is because you oppose a woman's right to choose. Well, do you? Will you say, on the record, whether you support a woman's right to choose? Mr. Miller, before you asked your question, you confronted me with something said about me by my critics. These unnamed critics seem to have the ability to read human minds, because they know my real reasons for doing what I do without even asking me. However, mind reading is not a human skill. I strongly suspect that the critics you speak of are just you yourself. Now, if you were to have done some journalism and actually looked into my work on the subject, I'm investigating the Sanger Center because I have reason to believe that they are systematically violating Indiana's requirement to report cases of child abuse and neglect. That refusal to report is a crime under Indiana Code Section 31-33-5-2. Another reporter, once again a furious white woman, had her turn to vent her spleen at the Attorney General. Mr. Garrett, if taxpayer money is so important to you, why are you wasting taxpayer dollars to investigate very isolated incidents of alleged misconduct? Why do you presume these incidents of misconduct are isolated? If there is a reason to believe that the young women of Indiana are in need of protection from predators, it is my job to protect them. I'm going to ask the questions that the press won't ask. Aren't you the least bit interested in whether the Sanger Center is covering up child sex abuse? Aren't you curious as to whether it's systematic? Did you ever ask yourself who is being protected when the Sanger Center uses abortion to get rid of evidence of potential crimes? Hall paused the playback. This guy fights, he said. The next reporter was far more cordial. Mr. Garrett, she asked so politely that Shanice and Hall looked at each other in surprise. Is it true that you oppose abortion, even in the case of rape and incest? Garrett paused for a beat before answering. In the very first class I attended at law school, my professor said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said, hard cases make bad law. I think you'll have to admit that the issue of abortion in the case of rape or incest is a hard case, in the sense that we have to consider the victim of the crime. Why should she be made to suffer any more than she suffered at the hands of the evil bastard who attacked her? By the same token, you also have to consider the baby. The baby has harmed nobody, but it's the baby that's going to do the dying. That's what a hard case is. Having to make a tough call when you have two legitimate interests that stand against each other. But you just, the now formerly cordial reporter stammered. Oh no, you're going to let me finish. As I was saying, you're using that hard case to distract your audience from an easy case. It's very misleading. The Sanger Center is an easy case in the sense that we have an organization that seems to be systematically covering up the sexual abuse of minors. You claim to support women's rights. When I announce that I'm going to get justice for the victims of sex crimes against those who covered up for their attackers, you give me grief. The reporters resumed questioning Garrett in their customary outraged tone. They're literally screaming at him, Hall said of the journalists. Just last week, we kept hearing white liberal journalists going off about how white girl tears were used as a weapon against innocent black men. Where's the NAACP? Shanice asked. Where are these journalists' liberal colleagues? Garrett is a very embodiment of the American dream. He's the great-grandson of slaves. He's the grandson of sharecroppers. They're trying to stop his rise with cheap gotcha questions. This is not how the media treated President Darnell James when he was a candidate. Garrett concluded the press conference. Now go write your hit pieces about me. Go write about how I'm bringing back medieval oppression of women. I've got work to do. I need to protect Indiana's young women and girls. With that, Garrett left the podium. Shanice, take this job. This man is going places. Do a good job, and you'll have a job in the governor's mansion before long. Article 2, Section 2, Suburban Home, 2 years before Election Day. Arnold Nguyen wasn't used to evenings in which his house was quiet enough to hear background music, such as the string quartet that was playing softly on the stereo. Felicia had taken the children to see her mother, so he could have this meeting with Jonathan Hall and Shanice Andrews. "I'm going to call it the Hall Media Group," Hall said. "That's a good name for a journalism outfit," Nguyen replied. "It was Shanice's idea," Hall said, putting his arm around her again. "That must be our guest," Nguyen replied when the doorbell chimed. He got up to answer it. A moment later, he returned with an older woman. Trailed by the diaphanous linen of her vivid blue slip dress, Olga glided like a swan into the parlor. In contrast to the solid blue of her dress, the silk shawl wrapped around her shoulders was a riot of blue, turquoise, and violet. Her effortless movement made Hall wonder where a woman, approaching 70, got all that energy. The silver curls that cascaded down her shoulders were flecked with an auburn highlight here and there. Standing next to her, Nguyen looked rather drab in comparison. "Do you know who this is?" asked Arnold. Hall looked at Shanice. "Wait, you're Olga Galanis, aren't you? You own Erato Cosmetics." Olga smiled. "Yes, I am," she said, with just a hint of a Greek accent. She took Shanice by the shoulders and looked at her. "You're even more beautiful than I thought you would be." Shanice gave Arnie a puzzled glance. "Arnie showed me your photo," Olga explained. "He also showed me the picture of you on your website." Shanice blushed and looked at her shoes. "Do you mind if I tell you how well you made yourself up? Cosmetics are my business, I always notice." "Thank you. I should hire you to model for me. Have you tried our Aegean Paradise line yet?" "Not yet." "I'll send you some." Olga hugged Shanice as Hall, his hands firmly thrust into the pockets of his new suit, wondered what to do. Olga soon turned her attention to him. "You must be Jonathan Hall." "Yes," he said. When Olga hugged him, Hall noticed a hint of her exotic floral perfume. "You're a lucky man to have a woman like this in your life," Olga said, gesturing to Shanice after she released Hall from the hug. Hall tried not to blush. "Oh, relax. Nothing to worry about. I just want to talk to you, to get to know you, before I made a contribution," Olga said. "Contribution?" Hall said. "We didn't come here to ask you for anything. We didn't even know you'd be here." "I know you didn't. I asked Arnie not to tell you I'd be here. I wanted it to be a surprise. That way, you couldn't prepare to impress me. You'd just be yourselves." Hall and Shanice looked at each other and shrugged. "Why don't we all sit back down?" Arnie said, gesturing to the sofa and easy chairs that surrounded the coffee table. Hall and Shanice resumed their spot on the sofa, as Arnie and Olga took the chairs. "I guess I'll start by asking you why you did your undercover video of the Sanger Center," Olga began. "That was Jonathan's idea," Shanice said. "He said the most important thing to do would be to show the world what they really are. That's not what I mean. You're a college student. Your entire school is dedicated to supporting abortion on demand, yet you stand against that. Why you?" Shanice paused to think. "Don't laugh. It's something my pastor said in a sermon when I was in junior high." Olga gently placed her left elbow on the arm of her chair. Leaning her chin into her hand, she regarded Shanice. Shanice took a moment to gather her thoughts and continued. "My pastor one Sunday, from the pulpit, talked about lynching. Sitting there in the pews, I was 12 years old. He told us about how many lives were lost to that atrocity from the 1830s to the 1960s. The way he spoke, you could just see the lives being snuffed out right in front of you. It really got the congregation going. In fact, he pulled out a postcard from the 1800s. It was an image of George Meadows hanging from a tree by his neck. That poor young man, lynched like that. Then he pulled out a printout. I think it was from the Sanger Center website. It was an abortion ad, targeted specifically to black women. I'll never forget the slogan. It said, 'Trust black women's decisions.'" Olga, her eyes widening, just looked at Shanice. "Then he really let us have it. Holding up the abortion ad in one hand and the lynching postcard in the other, he shouted, 'This time, we're doing it to ourselves!'" Shanice wiped away a tear. Hall put his arm around Shanice's shoulder. Shanice continued her story. A couple of years before that sermon, my mom and dad had another baby. My parents used to show me pictures of the baby growing inside my mother. They got these little sonogram printouts at the doctor's office. Even as a 10-year-old, to me, those were pictures of a real baby, my little sister. When my pastor gave that sermon, my little sister was sitting next to me. I made a connection that stayed with me all these years. Olga leaned in towards Shanice. With a knowing smile, she nodded just a bit. Turning to Hall, she addressed him as well. What's your motivation, young man? Actually, it's really simple. I hate being lied to. Arnie broke into a wide smile. Yeah, that's what got me started too. I always think about what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. They lie to us, we know they're lying, they know we know they're lying, but they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them. I like that, Hall said. Me too. I think that's why I really liked your videos so much. That's why I wanted Olga to meet you. So, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Olga asked. I don't know if this journalism project is going to catch on, Hall replied. I'm just going to work hard on it and see what happens. Why do you sound so worried? Olga asked. It feels like if I don't impress you with some big detailed plan, then I'm going to miss some big opportunity to gain your respect for us and our project. Let me tell you something, Jonathan. Nothing in my life went the way I thought it would go. It's the wisdom of a... Olga paused. It's the wisdom of a woman with a long lifetime of experience. By now, both Hall and Shanice had leaned in to listen to Olga. I was the daughter of a Greek farmer. We didn't grow up rich. I was raised by my parents and grandparents to value my family, my faith, hard work, and frugal living. Shortly after I got married, I came to this land of opportunity with my husband. We didn't know we'd make it. All we had were those values we shared and his genius for chemistry, pigments, and aesthetics. Olga was quiet for a moment. She swallowed visibly and continued. He named the company after the muse Erato, the Greek goddess of love poetry. He said I was his muse. When he passed away, he left me with his fledgling business and 2 small daughters. As a widowed mother, I didn't know if I had what it took to make my company a success. Apparently I did. I think it was those values. I plow every nickel I made back into the business. I was determined to build something that would last. It would be the Galanis family thing. Shanice and Hall, their eyes fixed firmly on Olga, nodded as she continued. I was also determined to give my children the best education I could get them, so I could pass those values on. Starting in preschool, I sent them to the finest schools Manhattan had to offer. You wouldn't believe how New York's wealthiest families compete to get their kids into the best preschool. But where a kid goes to preschool influences which elementary they get into, and then which prep school. Play your cards right, and they will be accepted into an elite university. Hall snorted and looked at Shanice, and then back at Olga. I love this country, but in the schools I worked so hard to get my kids into, they were taught that the real founding of this country was in 1619, with the arrival of the first black slaves. They were taught that the Revolutionary War was fought not to gain independence from Britain, but to preserve slavery. My daughters would come home with the questions their teachers would put to them. You only love America because you're white. How would you feel if you were a slave? They never told my girls that slavery existed nearly everywhere in human history. I trusted those schools to teach them. Instead, they manipulated them. My daughters even began feeling guilty about being white. They had nothing to feel guilty about. They did nothing wrong. Shanice nodded. When I got to college, I took a black history course. They weren't really about black history. They were about how white people treated black people. It's as if the most important thing that happens in a black person's life is how they're treated by white people. Talk about white supremacist views. I learned more about black history from my grandfather than I did in college. Your grandfather, what was he like? He was a baseball player. He played shortstop for the Kansas City Monarchs. Wait, Hall interrupted. Your grandfather played for the Negro Leagues? Really? You mean he knew guys like Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Jackie Robinson? Yep, Shanice said with a grin. He knew every one of them. You're losing me, Olga admitted, as Hall stared at Shanice wide-eyed. In the late 1800s, when professional baseball leagues were being created, the major league teams agreed among themselves not to hire black players, Shanice explained. As a business person, I just don't understand it. You mean to tell me they literally wouldn't improve their teams if it meant hiring a black player? Olga said, shaking her head. Rather than begging for table scraps, a bunch of black entrepreneurs got together and created the Negro Leagues, Shanice continued. Just so you understand, Hall explained, the baseball that was played in the Negro Leagues was probably even better than the baseball in the majors. Negro League stars were legendary. My grandfather was not a legendary baseball player like Jackie or Josh or Satchel. His batting average was, well, pretty average. He never made it to the majors, even after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. That's too bad, said Hall. No, it's not too bad. My grandfather lived the history of the Negro Leagues. When he told me his stories of his playing days, of course he told me of his stories about rotten treatment he and his friends got from white people, especially in the Jim Crow South. He had his stories about not being allowed to use the restroom in white-owned gas stations. That was part of his history, but that wasn't the whole story. He also had his stories about his fellow players, about his fans, about the little kids who surrounded him, looking for his autograph. That's black history too, but you won't hear about that in the university classroom, at least not in any classroom I've been in. None of my professors ever had any interest in hearing about my grandfather's experiences. You see, Olga said, that's what I'm looking for. Someone who's interested in finding and telling the whole story. In college, I wasn't taught a warts-and-all history of the United States, Shanice said. I was taught a warts-only history of white America and a warts-free history of black America. That might be emotionally satisfying to some people. That's why it's so useful to radicals looking to recruit new activists. If I'd have known what it would make them, I would never have sent my daughters to college, Olga said. If I hadn't sent them, I'd be a grandmother by now. Shanice leaned in to listen. Yeah, Olga murmured. That's what Greek children call their grandmother. A pained look creeped onto Shanice's face. Chloe, my older daughter, got pregnant by a boy she hooked up with in college. When the young man wouldn't man up, her voice trailed off. Shanice and Hall fidgeted a bit as they waited for Olga to continue. I tried to talk her out of it, Olga said. Mom, I'm more than just an incubator, was her line. It sounded like a line she'd rehearsed. Of course, Chloe. You're more than just an incubator, darling. You're a daughter, and a sister, and a student, and a friend, and a poet. I promised her that the baby would have the best of everything, and that she could pursue her ambitions as she pleased. But she made that choice. I was heartbroken. Instead of discussing it with me, she went to her professors and the activists at the Sanger Center. They had trained her to have contempt for those who think differently than they do. After college, she worked with me for a few years. It didn't work out. What happened? Hall asked. It wasn't long before she would mock my business, saying I was tying women to outdated patriarchal standards of beauty, that I help men objectify women. She had no problem accepting the money from her trust fund. She just wouldn't accept me anymore. Hall and Shanice offered Olga small, accepting smiles. I was so proud of my older daughter when she got into college at Bryn Mawr. She was a classic beauty, just like you, Shanice. The last time I saw her, she'd shaved off half her hair, and her scalp was covered in tattoos. After a long pause, Arnie spoke up. In my family, we know exactly what kind of disaster activists who sow chaos can inflict. How so? Hall asked. The communists all started as gangs of activist thugs. The Bolsheviks in Russia started out as a gang of thieves. They called the bank robberies that funded their revolutionary activities expropriations. But even if they don't take over a country like they did in Russia, gangs of activists can cause a lot of chaos. Anti-Ra got its start in Germany between the world wars. They were trying to topple the liberal democratic Weimar government in the hopes of taking power in the ensuing chaos. But Anti-Ra lost. Hitler's goons were doing the exact same thing. You know how that turned out. Hall nodded. What you probably don't know is the experience of people like my grandparents in Vietnam. Just like in Germany and Russia, the revolutionaries started out as a criminal gang. One of those gangs in Vietnam was called the Binh Xuyen. That group went from being a gang of outlaws to a revolutionary force. The story is long and complicated, but amidst all the chaos they sowed and all the uprisings they had inspired, the government lost its legitimacy. A few rigged elections later, the country was on the road to civil war. My parents and grandparents had to escape the murderous communist regime that took over Vietnam in the end. Corrupt elections. That sounds familiar, Shanice said, rolling her eyes. Does anybody sincerely believe that Old Man Barrage really won that last election? Hall asked. Wouldn't be the first time the United States recognized a corrupt election just because it was convenient. In the 1955 State of Vietnam referendum, the 450,000 registered voters of Saigon somehow managed to cast over 600,000 ballots. The USA recognized Ngo Dinh Diem as the new leader of Vietnam and a hero of the free world, despite their qualms about how democratic Diem's government would be. That election established the new nation of South Vietnam. We all know how that turned out. You see, that's what chaos and distrust in institutions can do, Shanice said. That's why I do what I do. We aim to force the institutions, the government, the universities, the media, to live up to their own set of rules, Hall said. It's the only way to keep our republic, Arnie said. And that's why I'm going to donate $100,000 to your enterprise, Olga said. Hall and Shanice looked at each other in amazement. Just so you know, we've set up a 501c3. Any donation is tax deductible, Shanice managed to stammer. Why would I care about tax deductible? To a billionaire, $100,000 is like $100 to a millionaire, which is like a dime to a thousandaire. Besides, if I deducted it from my taxes, I would have to report to whom I contributed. But if my daughters found out I gave you anything, I bet they would start lawyering up right away to preserve the money they think they will inherit from me. Better nobody knows it was me who gave you this money. I don't know how to thank you, Hall said. I'll tell you how. I have a special assignment for you. What is it? After dinner, I'll show you the videos. This is Ari Mendelson. I hope you're enjoying Consent. I'd love it if you could show your appreciation for my years of hard work by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. But why keep this adventure to ourselves? I wrote Kingmaker because I believe its message of keeping control of our own minds is one that America needs to hear. Young men especially will profit from learning the message that lies at the heart of these novels, that the straightest path to happiness is by improving yourself one step at a time, rather than attempting to change others. So, share this audiobook far and wide across your favorite social platforms. See the description below for other ways for you to support my work. Thank you so much for your time and attention.